How's it going, everybody? And welcome to episode 313 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode marks the first of our sowing guides. And as I mentioned last week, it's I got to add in the edibles in one episode and then follow on with a second one that looks after ornamentals because it's kind of hard to marry them together. I've typically focused on the edibles, and they're timely. They kind of take into account what's happening weather-wise, and they're they give people a reminder at the start of the month. So they always prove popular, and yeah, I'll continue to do them throughout the year. Slight tweak on it in that I'll add the ornamentals on a separate one. And the reason for separating them is, I suppose, even though in the garden we'll try and combine them a little bit, combine them very much together in the same spaces. But, when it comes to sowing, there's a slightly different approach to both. So we'll divide them from that point of view. I'm also a little bit conscious that some people are all about their edibles and their vegetables, and others are very much about their flowers, while they might do a little bit of both, or people might cross over from one to the other. Typically, people lean towards one or the other. But a good to have the combination of both is always good. So this episode is for the edibles. And as I said, at the start of every month, I'll kind of take into account what's happening weather-wise. And this is very much, as I said last week, this is very much your starting point. This is where we start sowing. And from here, the list will develop and get bigger. More things will be added as we go through the next couple of months. And then as we come out, May being probably the biggest month where we have the most variety of stuff to sow. And then as we come out of May, we'll go into June, and the list will start to decrease again and the cycle continues. And the big thing, I suppose, at this stage is to remember at this point of the year that as we go through the year, the sowing of the various crops on a continual, regular basis is what's going to give you that continuity of supply, of your various crops and so on. So it's really important to continue, even if your space feels full at certain times, because coming down the tracks, you're going to have harvests, you're going to have things coming out of a space, and then that gives you opportunity to capture more crops as it goes along. As I mentioned last week, when we enter February, today is a prime example. As I look out now, sun is shining here, but we've just had, a storm over the last few days, severe flooding in certain areas. We've had, the whole month of January's typical rainfall fall within 24 hours in certain places. One area where they said that the whole month's worth of rainfall fell in 4 hours. And obviously that has had knock-on effects in terms of flooding and damage. There was also storm, with storm winds. Wasn't too bad around here actually in terms of the winds. There was loads of rain. But yeah, it's been a tricky few days. And now as I look outside, the sun is shining and it's quite mild. So you can see at this stage of the year, you can get this variances, and there's days where you think, sun is shining, blue sky, let's go, the gardening season is up and running. But then the next day you could be back to cold temperatures or snow, or that's just the nature of February and March. So we tread carefully, we ease into it. Something I mention all the time is that you really need to get to know your area, because certain areas can be a month ahead of other areas within the country. And it's vital that you kind of get to know your area. You can have also little microclimates in various places. So the more you understand your area, the more you get to know your area, the more that you'll sort of be able to tweak these sowing guides to suit your area particularly. So yeah, that's just a kind of something to set the tone before we start getting into the individual crops that we can sow. Um, This list is relatively big for February. I don't do any sowing before the middle of the month, so at least for the next 10 days, I won't be doing any sowing. But from there on, I'll do quite a big sowing. And yeah, I'll go through now what it is that we can sow. First thing on the list, and it's going to be on the list pretty much all the way to the end of our sowing guides, which will be, September, October, and that's spring onions. I'll sow them every month. This is one where you'll have you'll do sowings on these on a continued basis in order to have crops all the time. For anyone that's new to this, that's known as successional sowing. So it means that you're successionally sowing every month or every couple of weeks in order to ensure your crops coming down the tracks. The other thing just to be aware of from a sowing perspective is that the timings or the length of time it takes to germinate, the length of time it takes from sowing seed to a plug plant that's available to plant out, that speeds up as the weather gets better, as the temperatures rise, as growth levels increase. So at this stage of the year, you could sow seeds today, and in 2 weeks' time, you could sow the exact same seed. And if you went a month down the line, you would barely be able to tell the difference between, which was sowed on which date. Because growth rates, germination rates are that bit slower at this stage of the year. But when you get further on, 2 week gap will be huge. You'll get a lot of growth in 2 weeks once we get further down the track. So that's where you'll get used to your own sowing rates, your own area, the amount that you're consuming, and the speed at which you're able to have space ready for more crops. So the list is spring onion, as I said, that'll be on every list from now to the end. Initially, I'll be multi-sowing that, so that means several seeds in a single module, and the first batch will end up being planted out into the polytunnel. The other one is onions, red onions, white onions, shallots. They can all be sowed from seed now. Again, I have most success I do both. I do sets at the back end of the year, and I also do sowing from seed. And I just find the sowing from seed is a little bit better, just less prone to any dry, when you get a dry spell followed by a wet spell, less prone to bolting and so on. So onions I'll be sowing as well. Then a couple of the brassicas I'll be sowing, early cabbage, early calabrese, early cauliflower, early varieties of all of those. I don't sow a lot of those. Here in the house, they're a little bit hit and miss. Sometimes people like them, other times they're not pushed on them. So I don't always sow these, but I will be sowing them in the month of February. Then there's kind of a batch of salads that we'll continue to sow, spinach being one. Winter salads, that's on that does be on the last list of the year. But again, I'll do another sowing of that because it's quite hardy. You will get a crop out of it fairly quickly. If you do get any, really harsh weather over the next 2 months, which we can do, as you know, then these will still be hardy and still be able to harvest these. So winter salads, I'll do one more sowing of those. They're things like mizunas and so on. Then you can sow lettuce, pretty much any type of lettuce at this stage. They'll need to be, any of the sowing that we're doing now, you'll need to have them in a polytunnel or in your windowsill or somewhere where they can be kept sort of consistently warm. So that's really important. So lettuce is another one. Radish is another one. That's going to be one of your quicker maturing crops. And that's one we can sow now. Leeks is another one. Again, multi-sow into a module tray. Broad beans, that's another one. Any of you that have been listening for a while, broad beans, I could take or leave them. I do sow them. Don't love them, so I do one sowing of those. And I don't love them, and they're a little bit meh. I might and I might not, but I will definitely do one sowing and do it in the next couple of weeks. What else have we on the list? So we have beetroot. Again, my first sowing of beetroot will be done into module trays, and again, I will do a multi-sow of that. Even though it is a cluster seed, and you will have a couple of seedlings coming from a singular seed, I will still do a multi-sow on that. I find they mature quite well and they grow quite well together. When it comes to herbs, then we can sow parsley, dill, chard, parsley, dill, coriander, rosemary. You can sow pretty much all your herbs now, except for the really heat-liking basil and so on. Chard is another one that I'll sow. That'll be Bright Lights is the variety I grow. So it's multicolored chards. It's not a herb. It's more along the lines of a spinach. Really good crop. I don't need a lot of those. So one sowing, maybe 3 to 4 plants is all I'll do of those because, as I say, I don't need a lot of them. And you'll harvest off them for a really long time. So while they'll be on the sowing guides every month, you don't need to sow them every month. So there's certain crops like that where you'll be able to do one good sowing that should get you through most of the year. For me, then I'll do a second sowing of chard later in the year to plant into the polytunnel. And with doing that, you'll be heading for 12 months supply of chard from just kind of two sowings. So you can do clever little things like that. Other things that we can be growing, peas for shoots at this stage of the year, a little bit early for planting out, but for shoots or as a microgreen, you can definitely sow. Most microgreens you can sow now once you have the temperatures to germinate them and so on. So yeah, there's a lot there. Then when it comes to things that are going to need good heat and sustained heat, you're looking at things like peppers, chilies, aubergines, tomatoes. They can all be sown now, or from the middle of the month onwards. Definitely going to need either germinate them inside in the heat of your house. You're going to need somewhere to protect them afterwards when you do have to move them out because it's early, or you're going to need a heated propagator or a warm greenhouse, whatever the case may be. But you're going to need warm temperatures and you're going to need consistent temperatures in order to germinate these. Definitely for aubergine and chilies, you want to be kind of getting going early with these because of the length of time that it takes. Now, I personally don't grow aubergines. I have grown them in the past for two reasons. Number one, I don't love them. Number two, I find that my tunnel is a little bit cold for them still, and they take a long time and they like a lot of heat. So I just don't get the temperatures for long enough to really develop them. Now, I have matured them before, but I don't love the taste of them, so I don't bother with them personally myself. I do have seed for them, but I won't sow them this year. Other things that you can do if you have a polytunnel, you can sow some carrots indoor towards the end of the month, or even if it's quite warm, you can do it, even earlier around the middle of the month, and that'll give you your first harvest. And that's going to be something like the sugar snack or the smaller, sweeter carrots. That's what you're looking for. So you're not going to look to develop them into big, big carrots, but something that'll give you that first harvest of a nice sweet carrot. That can be done, as I say, from the middle of the month. Potatoes. Again, in some places you can get them into your tunnel now. Alternatively, if you're looking to plant them outside, you can be still chitting your potatoes. I've mentioned this before, still stand by it. Everybody talks about chitting your potatoes and how important it is. I think a lot more important is the ground temperatures when it's going in. If the ground temperatures are cold, you can do all the chitting you want, they'll still sit there. What's really beneficial is getting them into warm soil. So in a polytunnel, if you're able to have black polythene or something down that gives an extra few degrees heat in the ground before you plant them, and then you're able to keep them a little bit warmer by covering with, frost fleece or something for the first few weeks, that will really help. But anything that can keep the ground temperatures warm, and that's when we go to plant outside, people, kind of rigidly stick to St. Patrick's Day to plant potatoes. I'm more concerned about what the ground temperature is. If the ground temperature is warm enough, then they'll just hit the ground and go, and your date doesn't really matter. Whereas if you put them in on a set date and the ground temperature is really low, they will sit there and they won't do anything until the ground temperature comes up. And when the ground temperature comes up, they'll get up and running again. So there's no mad benefit in getting early into the ground unless the ground temperatures. So in relation to chitting, very helpful. And if you have chitted potatoes going into warm soil and unchitted potatoes going into warm soil, the chitted potatoes give you that extra little bit of speed in terms of giving you an extra few days. They'll push ahead a little bit quicker. But the bigger factor of that is the heat of the ground. So yeah, that's the big thing. Watch out for that as opposed to the chitting or non-chitting. But if you do have them, you should definitely be chitting them at this stage. So just to run quickly over that list again, we have spring onion, cabbage, calabrese, cauliflower, onions and spinach, parsley, dill, coriander, rosemary, all your herbs basically, except for the really hot loving ones. Then you have chard, winter salads, beetroot, lettuce, turnip, radish, broad beans, leeks, and then the heated ones, peppers, chilies, tomatoes, and aubergines. So there's quite a good bit there. There's enough for you to be getting started with. Next month's list will expand out even further as a few more varieties can be sown or a few more crops can be sown. But that gives you a good starting point. Again, for me, not till the middle of the month, but once the middle of the month comes, away we'll go. And then continuity of sowing, successional sowing month by month after that. As I mentioned with chard, there are certain varieties where I don't need to sow every month, just twice a year will do. Other things that fall into that category are carrots. Obviously, you don't need to be sowing them all the time. Just do like 2 or 3 strategic plantings or sowings of carrots throughout the season will give you carrots basically for 12 months of the year or more or less for 12 months of the year. So sometimes, that's an important factor is to get strategic plantings or sowings at certain times to extend out and to give you more options. Obviously, with things like spinach and spring onions and that, they kind of run to seed or they push on and get too mature. So then you have to do a lot more sowings with them. But for certain things, they'll hold, or you can harvest them in a certain way and extend out the length of time between sowings and reduce the number of sowings that you need to do. Because I suppose, like everything, sowing is it's something to add on. It's another job to add on, and you just want to be efficient, really, really efficient with your sowing, and mean that you're not all the time sowing. So yeah, I hope that helps. That's kind of your edibles sowing guide. And in terms of other things within the edible garden, you can still plant all your fruit trees from bare roots, all your fruit bushes, your rhubarb stools. You can get asparagus stools or crowns, asparagus crowns, all that sort of thing. At this stage of the year, you still have another kind of month to 6 weeks of that. You can still create your no-dig beds. Still, the ground, nothing is growing really yet, apart from grass, which does seem to be growing. But generally speaking, there's no growth yet. So, really good time to start your no-digs beds from scratch. For anyone that hasn't booked on yet, that's interested in going to either the 2 workshops on the 21st of February or the 21st of March. The 21st of February is almost sold out yet. The 21st of March, there is probably half the slots gone. But definitely, if you're thinking of coming in with friends, definitely be booking those in. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes. And yeah, there's a lot of people coming to them, and it's good. I'm delighted to be getting back at them. I've lots of work to do in preparation for them, which has been hindered by my accident a week or two ago and this horrible wet weather. But yeah, we'll be all set up and good to go. Good to go for the 21st of February. For anyone that's wondering what happens at those, so individually we look at what it is that you're doing in your garden, what you're struggling with, what you want to improve, what has been a fail, what you'd like to get better at, um, challenges, and we troubleshoot anything that will help you be successful with the crops that you want to grow in the coming year. We look at all the principles that we need to look at in order to grow successfully, and there's hands-on seed sowing, hands-on creation of a no-dig bed, hands-on planting of bare root fruit trees, and so on. So it's very hands-on, but also troubleshooting and helping you for the specific things that you need help with in your garden. So 21st of February, 21st of March, 21st of February is nearly gone. And I'll put the link in the show notes. You can just book through there. And yeah, that's been this week's What to Sow in February edibles. And yeah, hope that helps. I know these, as I said, these prove very, very, very popular every month. So yeah, the ornamentals one I'll do on a separate piece. And that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening. And until the next time, happy gardening.